You want to find that drive and focus that has you locked in and on fire every single day? My book, The Mirror Motivation, will do it for you. I bought a copy for you. You take care of the shipping. The book is free. Click the link down there. I got you.
DreAllDay.com.
Dre Baldwin, DreAllDay.com. Hope y'all can. We got a good angle here. Yeah, I'm kind of sitting at an angle. I got my ice on my knees. I got my feet in a bucket of ice water right now. I just finished running. But I wanted to talk to y'all about change and fear, which is, I was actually just today, before I started, while I'm recording this, in between, I was listening to an audiobook of one of my favorite books. It's called The 50th Law by 50 Cent and Robert Greene. And some of y'all know that book. If you know me, you know that 50 is my favorite musician. He's my favorite rapper, even though he don't even put out music like that anymore. But he's still my favorite one. I like a lot of rappers, but he's my favorite. And you know, he came out, like when his first album came out, it was like when I was in college, like 21. And then he put this book out with Robert Greene probably around 2010. And if you never read The 50th Law, I've talked about it many times on my podcast. For those of you who don't know, my podcast is, podcasts are audio. So I put out the video sometimes, but the audio is where you can get actually better quality sound and you can get all the episodes. Because I didn't do video for everything until I was like 1,000 episodes in. But anyway, I've talked about The 50th Law being one of my top 5 favorite books of all time. It's not just because 50 wrote it. Like, Robert Greene's my favorite author. So I read The 48 Laws of Power when I was in like high school. I'm not sure I was even in college yet when I read that book. And then I changed this from cold water to hot water, but anyway. And one of the things the main thing that book is about fear. Because Robert Greene, he does most of the writing. 50 told Robert the stories, and then Robert does all the writing for the stories. And the audiobook, Robert does the whole thing. And the book is all about fear, because Robert Greene says whenever he studies people, if you've ever read Robert Greene, he writes these long ass books. The 50th Law is the only short book that he wrote. All his other books are long as hell, like 400, 500 pages. And he says he studies these historical figures, because he references a lot of history in his books. And he says he always, whenever he studies a historical figure, somebody who's like famous or well-known, Napoleon Bonaparte, Alexander the Great, Ulysses S. Grant, whoever he's talking about, he says he can always trace their success. I gotta run some hot water real quick. He can always trace their success back to one solid skill, like one character trait that made them stand out from everybody else. So he said, for example, Napoleon Bonaparte, his skill in war was that he could look at a map and he could basically download all the information into his mind. Like Napoleon just had this photographic memory where he could remember what was on a map, even though back then maps weren't even that accurate. He would know locations, times, places. He would know the terrain. He knew it better than anybody that he ever fought against as a war general. So he had an advantage. It's almost like he had a computer in his head back before people had computers. And that was his main key skill, and that's why he was so successful in war. No matter what you think of Napoleon, he was successful because he had this key skill. And he said with 50 Cent, his key skill is because he followed 50 around for like a whole year, he said, to try to get inside of his character, to figure out what is it about this guy that makes him so interesting. And he found that 50's thing was that he was a fearless individual. Now, most people, when they hear fearless, what do you think about? When you hear fearless, you probably think about getting in arguments with people, getting in a fight, being a type of person who, intimidating other people and things like that. And Robert said, no, that's not what he meant when he found 50 to be fearless. That's like the surface level stuff. And there are a lot of people who may or may not have those fears. But what he meant with 50 is that he's the kind of guy who's not afraid of change. He's the kind of guy who doesn't get stressed out and anxious about things when something goes left, when a situation changes and goes in a different direction. He doesn't have a problem shifting gears when he sees something that's been working is not working anymore. He has no problem immediately just going to something else. And a lot of us have that problem. A lot of us have those fears. We may not call them fears, but that's what they are. The fear of change, for example. Many people have a fear of change. You ever hear somebody say, I'm set in my ways? In other words, they're saying, I'm afraid of doing something different because I know this situation, whatever I've been doing, I know it's comfortable and I know I can predict it. So even if it's not great, I'm afraid of changing because I'm not gonna know what's coming on the other side. And he said a guy like 50, he doesn't have that problem. And he goes through the book, basically going through, there's 10 chapters of the book, And he talks about different ways, things that 50 went through in his life that led him to being that type of person, and things that 50 does that shows how he is that type of person. And the thing is, I mean, everybody knows 50's story, that he got shot. So, and 50 says in the book, you know, when I got shot, I've heard him say it in interviews and things like that also, is when I got shot, I stopped being fearful, because what worse could happen to you than dying? I mean, he had somebody standing damn near point blank range shooting at him, and most people die from that, from one shot. He got shot at 9 times, and he survived it. He said he felt like all the fear bled out of him then, because he had seen death. He knows what it feels like to be right there on the cusp, on the precipice of death. Therefore, he's not bothered when a rapper disses him, or he loses a business deal, or you know, something goes wrong publicly and he's looking bad, or whatever, anything that's going on, it doesn't bother him, because he's dealt with the worst possible change that could happen, which is going from living to dying. And the challenge that Robert Greene puts before us in the book, The 50th Law, is that since most of us aren't probably going to go voluntarily try to get shot, or we're not going to try to have a terminal disease, or get in a car wreck where we almost die and we survive, instead of getting into a life or death situation to have to feel that energy that 50 felt going through that, you know, tragic situation, we had to choose to become fearless. And in the book, he lays that out. And I've listened to that audio book probably 50 times. I've read the book. I have the actual physical book. I got the digital book. I've read that book probably 100 times, because I'm always trying to figure out with myself, like, where am I resisting change? Where am I being fearful? Where am I just doing the same thing, even if things may not be working in a certain way? And that's the idea that I'm gonna hopefully get across to you here in this video, is for you to ask yourself, where am I sticking to things that may not be producing for me? Where am I not trying anything new? Where am I defaulting to doing this thing that's easy rather than focusing on this thing that's difficult? And on social media, that's a great question to ask people on social media, because since we can look into everybody's life and everybody's business and everybody's whatever they want to share these days, often people get distracted paying attention to what everybody else is doing, talking about, discussing, arguing about what other people are doing, rather than turning off the YouTube, turning off the Instagram, turning off the social media, turning off the blogs, and focusing on, like, what do I need to do so I can get into the space where I got people talking about me. So when I make these videos, always, even back to when it was basketball or whatever I was talking about, I've always stressed to people, like, the purpose of me making these is not for you to just watch it and then, you know, just take it as entertainment. To take this as, all right, what can I take from this message and go use to put myself in a space where people are gonna be watching me or reading me or subscribing to me, or whatever it is that you want to do, where I can help people, where whatever outcome you want to produce. It ain't about what I'm saying, it's about you taking what I'm saying, taking the parts that work for you. If 30 seconds of this video worked for you, take that 30 seconds and what are you going to do with it to do something different? So a lot of people just get stuck in the matrix of getting set in your ways and doing the same things over and over again, because then time's going to go by and you're going to be like, damn, what the hell happened? For me, it was a challenge to, first of all, figure out, am I going to stop playing ball, or did I stop playing ball? Because playing ball was comfortable. I was used to it. Going into a whole new space. 5 years ago, I went to a whole new space in the business world and, like, thought leadership and being this person who, yeah, I played basketball, but that doesn't matter to this audience of people. What else do I have to bring to the table? And those are things that, again, I'll talk about in detail on my podcast and in my book. So if you haven't listened to my podcast, the audio version where I got way more than what you've seen on video, and read my book, Work on Your Game, which actually happens to be right here. It's my book, Work on Your Game. If you haven't read this book, it's on Amazon. You can get an autographed copy from my website. Just go to workonmygame.com. That's where you get an autographed copy of the book shipped to you. But those are the things that I had to deal with. I had to deal with that change, and I chose that change. It's not like I was forced out of the game. I chose when I could have still kept playing. So anyway, the point that I'm making to you is, ask yourself, where are you resisting change? Where are you being fearful, but you're not calling it fear? Because that's what a lot of us do. We're too smart to say that we're afraid, because then we look bad. We call it something else. But check yourself for that. Work on your game.